So it affects the central nervous system. Now, the word which is commonly associated with rabies is hydrophobia. And for hydrophobia indicates an irrational fear of water. And usually a human infection with Lissa virus infection is referred to as hydrophobia. And that among animals is more commonly referred to as rabies. So when people are affected, we say people are having hydrophobia. And when animals, we say that is a rabid animal. Now, this infection is transmitted from infected mammals. So all mammals, all ones that give birth to young ones, starting from a small rodent to the large elephant, are susceptible for infection. And in fact, the sylvatic cycle, which happens in the wild animals, is what gets transmitted to the domestic animals, and man is an accidental host. So this gets transmitted from infected mammals to man and is almost always fatal. So this is a zoonotic disease of carnivorous animals. Okay, so meat-eating animals, especially dogs, and all warm-blooded animals are susceptible, as I told you, especially. Now, children among human beings are more susceptible because children tend to go and hug animals and they kiss animals. Okay, and so they are more liable to get licks and scratches. So children are more susceptible. So you can find rabies occurs in more younger children. Rabies is characterized by a long and variable incubation period, and the illness itself is short. It lasts between 7 to 10 days. And the typical characteristic sign is hydrophobia. Now, where does this word rabies come from? So some people, I think most Asians like to think that this comes from the Sanskrit word rabhas, which means to do violence. But some people think that it may have come from the Latin word rebere, which means to rave or to talk irrelevantly, and which happens when people are delirious. Now, jalasantara, another word from Sanskrit, it means agony caused by water. So these are the various terms which have been associated with rabies. Now let's look at it historically. So the great Louis Pasteur was the French chemist, and we have the Pasteur Institute, which has been named after him. And that has been done because he is the one who prepared the first nervous tissue vaccine from the spinal cord of an infected rabbit. And this was in the late 1800s. In the early 1900s, Negri, who was an Italian scientist, he demonstrated the virus particle, which was seen as an inclusion body in the neurons of a rabid animal. Okay, and this is the pathognomic. Okay, so if you want to know that there is rabies, then the nervous tissue is taken, and if you demonstrate Negri bodies, then that is a confirmatory sign of rabies. So this was demonstrated by Negri, and so they were named in honor of him. Then David Semple, he was the director of the Central Research Institute in India, in Kasauli, and he developed the beta-propion inactivated vaccine, and he developed this from the sheep brain, and so this was called as the Semple vaccine. Now, Semple vaccine has been used for a long period of time to combat rabies. Okay, but now it has been banned or discontinued. Then around the same period of time, Fleury developed the chick embryo as well as the duck embryo vaccine. And of course, we have the breakthrough with the modern vaccine, which was developed in 1964, when we had Whitaker and Koprowski, when they developed the tissue cell culture vaccine. Now, this has revolutionized rabies vaccine. When we were interns, we used to give by the time these human tissue vaccines came into practice, it was in the 90s. So though the vaccine was developed in the 60s, by the time it went through all of it, for these modern vaccines to come into public health care, it took a long period of time, especially in the developing countries. So in the 90s, in the late 90s, when we used to still give the nervous tissue vaccine, which was a large, 5 ml huge vaccine. We had to take this and give it in the abdomen, and people would get leave. So we would have a lot of people when they would have a a dog bite case, they would get a certificate saying that they have been bitten by a dog, and they would get leave for 21 days. Okay, so this is a long time ago. Now we're looking at almost 20 years later, we have mostly modern vaccines which have replaced the old vaccines. So that was a little bit about the historical perspective of rabies. Now the global burden. Okay, so annually around the world, around 59,000 people. These are the latest statistics from the technical report series on rabies. So around 59,000 people are estimated. Now, if you compare this with the number of deaths which are caused with dengue and malaria, it is much smaller. But these are deaths. Among most of the reported cases, you have almost absolute mortality. And therefore, there is this whole fear that is associated with rabies. So it causes a lot of loss, which is estimated by your Delhi's. And most of these loss are because of premature deaths. So the deaths are occurring among the younger people. And so it is premature death, and that is what makes rabies a public health problem. Now, if you look at where these deaths occur, a majority of the deaths occur in Asia, almost 2/3, around 60%. And then you have 1/3 which occur in Africa. So you can see that people are dying in Asia and Africa predominantly because of dog-mediated rabies. When we look at Asia and its contribution to the deaths, you can see that India accounts for almost, again, 2/3 of those deaths. Okay, so most of the deaths, Asia accounts for 2/3 of the deaths globally, out of which India accounts for a majority of the deaths. And you can see the cost that is associated. So post-exposure prophylaxis is a very expensive procedure, because if it's a category 3 wound, then you need to give rabies immunoglobulin, and that is expensive. And then the vaccine, it is not a single vaccine, it is a series of vaccines which are given on day 0, 3, 7, 14, 28, depending on the schedule. And if you're giving an intramuscular regime, then you need the entire vial. So it is very expensive. Okay. So it is a major burden, especially for the poor people, and they are the ones who are most susceptible. So these are the countries. The countries have been categorized here depending on the global burden, and this has to do with mainly dog transmitted or dog mediated human rabies. And as you can see, the red countries, that's where you have India, is reporting the maximum number of deaths. That has the maximum number. The burden is huge. If you look at the dark gray countries, the darker ones, these are ones which are not reporting rabies, dog rabies. Now, there are some countries which are free of dog-mediated rabies. What does this mean? When is a country certified as free of dog rabies? So there should be no indigenously acquired dog-mediated rabies case which have been confirmed in humans, dogs, or any other animal species for at least 2 years. So if you do not have, for the last consecutive 2 years, if you do not have any reported cases, then these countries are called as free. So you have countries in Western Europe, Canada, so in the Americas, okay, not in North America, not all of the Americas, and in some Latin American countries. Okay, so and as well as in Japan. So these countries, dog rabies has been eliminated. Now, Australia and many Pacific islands have always been free from dog-mediated rabies. So I put a question mark there, and I would like to ask, why is it that around, why is it that Australia and Pacific Islands, they don't report rabies? Anyone? Since we're looking at epidemiology, isn't that interesting that in some countries you don't get rabies? So why don't we get rabies then? Any idea? No migration of, oh yeah, all right. Yeah, they have laws. Okay, so you don't have dogs. Okay, infected dogs. Okay.
Look at me, look at me, look at me.
Okay, so typically you find marsupials. Marsupials. So marsupials don't have infection. So one thing is that they've been far. Okay, so we think that Australia broke off and went away, and so it was a natural barrier. Okay, and so we find a lot of different species also, right? We don't get marsupials anywhere else. Okay, so that's true. So water has been seen as a barrier. Okay, so maybe because there's islands and they're surrounded, that is why Australia is a large continent, which is like an island itself, right? The whole continent is far away. So it's protected because it is surrounded by water. So most island countries have lesser cases of rabies. Maybe because their animals are far away from other wild animals, and so they don't have the sylvatic cycle going on, and therefore the infection. So water acts as a barrier, and so many island nations have lesser amount of do not report rabies. Okay, but like Zenish very correctly pointed out, they can still have imported cases. So if somebody takes a dog and if that dog, but you must remember that dogs don't have a carrier status. Okay, infected dogs die, and that is the reason for which if you take animals to different countries, they are put in quarantine. Okay, so that is another reason so that we can limit rabies spread. So countries which are free or which have eliminated rabies can still report imported cases, and so therefore they need to continue to keep a watch. Okay, they have to keep a surveillance on the rabies virus, which is in the wildlife, which is in bats, and they need to stock on post-exposure prophylaxis for people who are living or people who are traveling to endemic areas. So bat rabies accounts now. So we have seen that dog rabies accounts for, just a minute please. Joshua, can you just tell that? Can you tell that my class is on? Yeah. All right, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so a lot of people, all activities going on from home. Okay, so bat rabies accounts for a small proportion of human cases, but in countries where you have, which have eliminated or which have lesser cases uh, of dog rabies, you find that bat rabies accounts for a majority of the human rabies cases, especially in the Americas. Okay, this is because people usually do not seek, they don't come takes bats, the bats, which the vampire bats, the bats which suck blood, which are the primary source of human rabies cases. Vampire bat rabies, so you find that vampire bats, they suck blood both from humans as well as animals, and their whole range, okay, is mainly you find vampire bats in southern America or Latin America, in Argentina, Uruguay, and northern Mexico. Okay, in Africa, Asia, and Oceania, we do have bats and in bats, but the public health risk of bat rabies is much lesser. Okay, so the cases which are reported from bat rabies from this part of the world is much lesser. We get more reports of it from the Americas. So now let's look at the agents, the etiological agent. So the Lissa virus, it comes from the family of the Rhabdoviridae. Rhabdo refers to the rod-like shape of these viruses. I think that is sweet, but I think someone needs to mute their mic. Right. Okay. So it is a single-stranded negative RNA virus, in a negative sense, RNA virus. And there are 5 major proteins which are encoded. Okay, so you have a nucleoprotein N, you have a phosphoprotein P, you have a matrix protein M, and you have a glycoprotein G, and then you have a large protein, so that is called as L because it's large. I think so. It's very pretty simple. Okay, so they have an RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, and this is a large protein, and this is called as L. So there are main 5 proteins here, and these have importance because when you're looking to develop the vaccine, this is what is being targeted. Now you can see that with, especially in countries where you have decrease in the dog-mediated rabies, that bat rabies is coming up. So you have the rabies Lissa virus, which infects. Okay, so you have the vampire bat infection for livestock. You can spill over to carnivores, foxes, and that can spill to human infections. Bats, you can see the numbers which I put here. The whatever is in Roman, these refer to your antigenic groups. Okay, and then you have different. So in Europe, in Australia, you have bat viruses, European, Australian. Okay, you can see here, good. Okay, so all the various different types of bats and how they interact with the other human species. So there are many bat associated viruses. And as we will be focusing on decreasing dog-mediated rabies virus, we will have to focus on the new viruses which have the potential to spread among human beings. Okay, human-bat interaction can be the potential source even in our part of the world. So this Lissa virus particle is shaped like a bullet. Okay, it's around 100 to 300 nanometers long. It is around 75 nanometers in diameter. It's composed of two structural and functional units. It has an internal helical nucleocapsid, and it has an external envelope. Okay, so this is how it looks typically like a bullet. Okay, and that's how it even enters. Okay, the host cell. Now, this is the cycle of infection and replication, as you can see, starting from stage 1, when it gets absorbed onto the receptors and there is virion interaction. And then you will look at it enters into the cell, uncoats, there's transcription, okay, processes. Then you will find that it's assembling itself, it has made more copies of itself. And then the new viruses, they begin to bud and come out of the cell. So we find that it is very efficiently adapted to survival. Okay, so the virus, once it enters in, and this is a neurotropic virus, and so you cannot get the viruses, you cannot find them in the blood. So if you draw blood sample, you will not get viruses. So you need nerve tissue. So this virus has an affinity for the nerve tissue, and that is where the replication occurs. Now, once it replicates, okay, so it binds to the nerve muscle cells, okay, at the site of inoculation, and it uses the acetylcholine receptors. It can remain there for a long period of time, and that is why you can have a variable incubation period. Okay, so when you sit in a adult immunization vaccine and if someone comes and tells you that they had a dog bite took place maybe a year ago, and they heard that the dog died, that some other people had died, you need to give the vaccine to the person, okay, irrespective of the period when the bite occurred, because there is a variable incubation period. If somebody gives you a history for which they are not adequately protected and you have sufficient biologicals with you, then you have to provide. Now that is what we would do when we would sit in the rabies. Okay, so if they give history and there is no documentation of previous protection, then these people also need to get the vaccine. Okay, so that is the importance of the incubation period. So the virus can replicate in muscle cells at the site of the bite with no obvious symptoms. Okay, it can just stay there for a long period of time. It then moves along the nerve axons to the central nervous system using a retrograde transport, and it arrives at the dorsal root ganglia and the spinal cord. Once it reaches the spinal cord, it spreads to the brain. Okay, and that's how it takes. Now, mostly if you see, the incubation period varies between 3 weeks to around 3 months. And then you get the signs and symptoms develop. Okay, so this picture just demonstrates what I told you. Virus enters via animal bite, it replicates, it infects nerves in the peripheral nervous system, it moves by retrograde transport, it travels from the brain via nerves to the other tissues such as eyes, kidneys, salivary glands. So it travels via nerves. So that is why, at least thankfully, in rabies, at least the blood is not a source of infection. Okay, and then it infects the brain. And these are the negri bodies that you see here. So inclusion and in the nerve tissue. So what are the reservoir of infection? So if you look, and I have classified and put it here according to the animals. So if you look at in urban areas in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, it is mostly because of dogs. Okay, though all other mammals, they have the potential to transfer. What we see more commonly is because of dog bites. Okay, so the animal which is most commonly the reservoir of infection is dogs. And then in Europe, in the Arctic, and in North America, they are foxes. And it is often thought it is these foxes which interact with the domestic animals and are responsible for transmitting the infection to the domestic animals. In the eastern parts of USA, there are raccoons. These raccoons are like large squirrels, okay? And they come into houses and gardens. They come in from the, they're often found even in garbage dumps, okay? Garbage dumps, garbage disposal, because they come for the food. In Western Canada, there are skunks. Skunks are those animals which release a lot of smell. In Asia, Africa, and North America, you also have coyotes. These are like smaller, they are more resemble, they are like a breed between dogs and wolves. These are coyotes. And then in South America, North America, as well as Europe, it is more with bats. And these are vampire bats as well as the insectivorous bats. There are bats that like fruits as well. And the fruit-loving bats have been implicated in which disease? Fruit bats. Any disease comes to mind with fruit bats? Plague? Anything more recent? Nipah. They love palm dates. Okay, so like dates. And all these, the palm trees where you have the sap which collects, they like the date palms. So, okay, fruit bats. So fruit bats can also. Okay. So what is the source of infection? So carrier status in rabies does not exist definitely among human beings. Okay, the period of infection itself is so short that you don't have, incubatory and convalescent period. Carrier status is not there. Okay, and in animals also they say it may be there, but it is possible, especially if you look at bats. So there are bats who may not die from the rabies infection, but who can act as a source of infection and keep that cycle alive between animals and human beings. Okay, so bats can act as carriers. Okay, so the main source of infection for human beings is cases of rabies. So rabid animals who have been infected with rabies, who have clinical signs and symptoms, they are the ones who rabies, as well as now, if a person has rabies, can they transmit it to other people? So that is rare. It's because the duration of illness is so short that they do not, but there is a theoretical possibility. And so people who come in contact with cases of rabies should take care, your PPE, personal protective measures. And if you think the contact is more close, then you would also need PEP. So host factors, again, younger age group, occupations, people who work among animals, people, veterinary surgeons, forest officials, people who work in forests, people whose livelihood is in the forest. For example, those who go and collect honey, people who are collecting herbs. Okay, so there are tribals who live within forest, areas. So these people, and so most of their occupation is dependent on generated from the forest. So those whose occupations have to do with being in a forest setting, then they are more at risk. Then all mammals are susceptible to rabies infection. So the mode of transmission, Here, the main source is a direct inoculation. So direct transmission, direct inoculation of the virus, usually from the saliva with bites and licks. And also you can have with scratches. Okay, so if the animal scratches, if because of bites and licks. Okay, so you can get, because animals tend to lick their paws. Okay, and with their saliva in their claws as well. So even when we scratch, there is a potential for transmission. Then there's also been evidence of aerosol transmission, especially if in caves where you have a lot of bats which are hanging, and if persons who have entered bat infested caves, though they have not been bitten by the bats or not come direct contact, they've even had infection coming from having breathed the air in those caves. Okay, so whether it is from the droppings of the bat, or whether it is because it has come out, but they have had infection through aerosol. Okay, so that is still being debated, but aerosol transmission has been demonstrated. Person-to-person transmission is rare, and usually rabies in human beings is a dead end for the virus. Okay, so you have a sylvatic cycle among the wild animals and an urban cycle among the domestic, and the domestic animals get the infection from the wild animals. And in our setting, the domestic animals are mainly dogs and cats. The incubation period is around 3 weeks to 3 months, but it can be as short as a few hours, and it can be as long as 4 years, and it can be up to 1 year as well. Okay, so 4 years is just an exception, but very often, even up to a year after having bit, people have developed rabies. So why this amount of variation in the incubation period? Okay, so it depends on where the person has been bitten, the site of the bite. So if the bite, as the bite gets closer to the central nervous system, that is how we categorize the bite as well. Okay, so it's far away on the foot, on the leg, it takes longer. Okay, but it also then, but even if it may be far away, if it's more severe, if there is a larger damage, more tissue has been torn off. Okay, we've seen bites where chunks have been pulled off, chunks of flesh have been pulled off. So if the bite is very severe, then that is definitely a category. So that's how, based on these factors, we categorize the wound. Okay, so where the person has been bitten, what is the severity, what type of animal has bitten. Okay, we've had persons who had bears had attacked them. Okay, so if it's a wild animal, then there's a higher chance. Okay, so animal species, it may be more aggressive. So it also depends on the nerve supply. So hands and the face, very richly innervated. Okay, and also closer to the nervous system. So they are, if you have any cuts on the hands or on the face, that is category 3. Okay, the amount of saliva which has been deposited in the wound, that also is related to the incubation period. Then clothes. So if the bite is on a protected, and if the clothes have not, so we first look at the clothes and see are the clothes torn or not. Okay, so you can see, bite us, but if the clothes are torn and you get a bite through, or if the clothes are not torn, then it's a lesser chance. Okay, and very importantly, if there is any previous history or not. So many people who have, even among those very rare survivors, they have had some partial history. Okay, a few doses of anti-rabies were taken, not completed course, but there was some partial immunity. Okay, so all of these affect the incubation period. So when we look at the clinical picture, let's start with the animals, since this is the zoonosis. And though we are not veterinarians, it's important to understand, because you can identify a dog that is rabid. So the clinical picture in animals has a prodromal phase, as we have in the human beings, which lasts for around 2 to 3 days. So what you find is the animals, they become nervous. Okay, they also become anxious. They can develop fever. Friendly animals become shy or irritable, and the aggressive ones may actually become docile and friendly. Okay, so this is in the initial period. So they will keep licking at the bite. Okay, and cats develop more fever, and they are more erratic than, the behavior is more erratic, okay, than dogs. And then you see the typical, you get either a furious phase or a dumb phase in animals. So in the furious phase, for which cats are more susceptible, it lasts usually between a day, 1 to 7 days. They become restless, irritable, they are hyper responsive. As they become more restless, they begin to roam. Okay, they don't want to sit in a place. They become more irritable, vicious. So even if somebody is passing by and even without being provoked, they will go and bite. Okay, and if you cage them, they may bite and attack the enclosures. So they become, then you will find that the change begins to occur. They become more disoriented, they have seizures, and they die usually within 10 days. Therefore, we tell people who have had dog bite, if it is from their locality, to watch the dog at least for 10 days. Okay, so the logic of that 10 days is because if the dog is rabid, it will usually die within 10 days. And then you have the other phase, which is the paralytic or the dumb phase. So animals may develop the paralytic phase either after the prodromal period or after the furious stage. Okay, so this paralytical phase, it develops within 2 to 4 days after the first signs, and the nerves which are affected are in the head and in the throat. And so what happens is the lower jaw, when it gets affected, then that jaw drops, and then you get that typical drooling, and the rabid animal, the sign of the rabid animal which drools comes from this affection. Okay, so they salivate, they're not able to swallow the saliva, the breathing becomes more labored, and they will die because of respiratory, the respiratory muscles get paralyzed, and because of respiratory failure, they die. Okay, so that was animal rabies. Now we will look at clinical rabies among human beings. Okay, so the standard case definition for rabies is a suspected clinical case. So a suspected clinical case is defined as an acute neurological syndrome which is dominated by forms of hyperactivity. It could be furious rabies or paralytic syndromes. This progresses very quickly towards coma and death because of either cardiac or respiratory failure, and within 7 to 10 days of the first signs, if there is no intensive care, the person dies. Okay, so it is very important. As you can see, we have a time period, you get a time frame in which we can intervene. Now the best way is, especially if there are severe wounds, is to give them the immunoglobulin, because it takes around 2 weeks for the antibodies to develop. So rabies immunoglobulin can be life-saving. If you look at the signs and the symptoms for rabies, then you can have any of the following. Okay, you can have aerophobia, hydrophobia, so they don't want the fan to be turned on. If they look at water, it can trigger spasms. They can have pain. It can be paresthesia. It can be localized pain. They have difficulty in swallowing. At the site, especially a typical sign is there is intense pain at the site of bite. Okay, so that is an indication that this person may be going for the rabies infection. For the standard case definition, if you want to look at, it is important that we should be able to confirm the clinical case. So you should be able to demonstrate either viral antigens in the samples. You can take brain tissue or skin. And normally in skin also the sample is taken around the hair follicles. Isolation of virus from samples in cell culture or in lab animals. Presence of viral specific antibodies in the cerebrospinal fluid or the serum of an unvaccinated person. Presence of viral nucleic acids in samples. So these are brain tissue, skin, saliva, and concentrated urine. So based on what you have with you, you can classify them as suspected. If you have, which are signs and symptoms which are compatible with the clinical case definition, then you call that as a suspected. If you have a suspected case, plus you have history of contact with the suspected or probably or confirmed rabid animal, then that's a probable case. and if you have a confirmed lab investigate test, then it is a confirmed case. So presumptive diagnosis is when you have history of exposure and you have illness. So that would be a presumptive diagnosis of rabies. So classical signs of rabies: spasms in response to tactile, auditory, visual or olfactory stimuli. Now you can have alternating periods of lucidity. The person appears calm, or the person could be agitated or confused, or there could be signs of autonomic dysfunction. Okay, so in whom excitatory signs is more, excitation is more prominent, you get more spasms. And if such a patient, you know that it is the impending prognosis is poor. Okay, so you know that the spasms and this, if they're having a lot of excitation, that there is impending death. In paralytic rabies, your excitation is much lesser. Phobic spasms can appear only in 50% of cases. And in the early signs of paralytic rabies, what you see is, if you look at, if you just tap, okay, on the chest, deltoid or the thigh, you get, there is swelling and pain. Okay, so myoedema. Then you will see, look at the hair follicles, you'll see that it is raised, so there's piloerection, and you have twitching of muscle fibers. So you can have fasciculation. Now, what we saw till now was the classical rabies, where you had either furious because of excitation, okay, you have furious rabies, or you can get paralytic rabies. So you also get atypical rabies. Now, many times rabies occurs in people, but we do not recognize it because they present like Guillain-Barré syndrome, okay, like a transverse myelitis, okay. So there is a lot of these atypical rabies is what leads to a lot of underreporting and misdiagnosis, okay, because you don't know if there is exposure to animal bite, you don't have facilities for testing, and your symptoms are totally different. Okay, so therefore it can be underdiagnosed and misreported. So these are the standard diagnostic tests for rabies. You can either detect the antigen by using a fluorescent antibody test, or you can use a DRIT. RNA you can detect by using an RT-PCR. This could be real time or the conventional RT-PCR. You can look at virus isolation. So virus isolation today has mostly become an academic exercise when you want to demonstrate. Okay, virus isolation, especially doing, you have to get brain tissue and you have to, so you do an autopsy, and or you can look to detect antibodies. Now, antibody detection is not as reliable, and you need to do it either from the serum or the CSF. Okay? And you can see that the testing also is based on whether we are doing it when the patient is alive or after the death. Now, how do we manage patients with rabies? We know that this is a fatal disease, but we still have to offer humane care. So, if you look at people who are dying, it's mostly in the poor rural communities in Asia and Africa. Okay, so here you have, so most of the people who are dying because of dog-mediated rabies, and because they are not able to access post-exposure prophylaxis. Another important reason is that your RIG, the rabies immunoglobulin, comes from serum, either human serum or equine serum, that is horse serum, and there is an acute shortage. Okay, so if you go to a healthcare center or you go to a primary healthcare center, you don't get a RIG. It's not present often. You normally get RIG only at higher centers, okay, which are more equipped. And therefore, it is because persons do not have access to the post-exposure prophylaxis that they are dying. So this is an algorithm which has been proposed to manage cases who are confirmed or suspected with rabies. Okay, so first thing that is done, do you have to give palliative care or do you have to give aggressive management? So the WHO recommends that in resources where you do not have adequate, you cannot offer management, then you have just go for management has to be only followed in areas where they have capacity, where the team is trained, okay, critical care is available, and obviously it depends on the cost. So the essential management for every case of rabies is that they have to have adequate hydration, they have to be sedated. As far as possible, they have to be kept in a calm, draft-free and quiet room. The diagnosis should be discussed with the family as soon as possible because of impending death. Benzodiazepine. So most commonly it's diazepam which is used, but you can also use lorazepam or midazolam, and they can be used for sedation and muscle relaxation. Morphine can be used, but again, morphine, not everyone. You need to have a license to give morphine. Availability of morphine is, again, it's not on your regular schedule, neither is it on your essential list of drugs. So morphine can be difficult to access. Haloperidol can be given as a tranquilizer, and excess salivation you can use scopolamine. Now it's important because when you have a case of rabies, all the people who are in that ward will land up in the immunization OPD. Okay, all of them will come. The rabies case, give us vaccine. Okay, so you can offer the vaccine and you must offer the vaccine to the healthcare workers, but you must see also that they also take your routine precautions. Okay, use PPE. Just because you take a vaccine doesn't mean that you are 100% protected. Okay, so you should give them the vaccine, but you must emphasize that they should protect themselves by using PPE, especially when they're doing intubation or suctioning of the patient. Okay, family should be counseled because there is impending death. Family may also need to be given in case, especially if there is an intimate partner. So you may need to give PEP. Okay. Till now, there have been no reports which have clearly established human-to-human transmission. Okay. And one concern for most people is, especially in areas, is if there's a rabid animal and they have had the milk. Okay. So they say, can we get rabies because of drinking the milk? Okay. Some animals, they die and they fall into a well. Okay. So they say, can we get rabies from drinking that well water, okay, into which the animal has died? So the public health concern is drinking milk because there is no hematophagus. It is not a transmission, a bloodborne infection. Neither is it because of an airborne or droplet infection. So drinking milk from a rabid animal, or if an animal falls into a well, it does not pose a public health risk. Now, this may seem a little off to you, but these are questions and concerns that we have seen from actual people. Okay, these are what people have asked. Okay, and that is why it is being clarified. Okay, so drinking milk from a rabid animal does not pose a risk, and neither does a dead animal in a well. Okay, so the whole village need not be given the vaccine. Now, let's talk about rabies survivors. Okay, because this has such a high fatality associated with it, so rabies survivors have become celebrities. Okay, and survival has been well documented in at least 15 cases. Okay, while there may be more, at least in 15 cases we have good documentation. Okay, and only one person has survived without having been vaccinated at all. Okay. So in all but one case, the survivors have received at least one or more doses before the onset of clinical rabies. Okay, and survivors of rabies, they have found that these people have an immune response which is associated with the neutralizing anti-rabies virus antibodies. So this is why they have been able to survive. But most of the survivors have ended up with a lot of neurological deficit. Okay, now, we have seen the essential management, which is more like a palliative. You just take care of the person until they die. Okay. The other form of treatment is aggressive management when you want to save. So the Milwaukee protocol was used, and this was used in an adolescent in 2004 very successfully, and the adolescent survived. So it has to be undertaken with well-trained teams, and you have to have experts. You have to have a protocol. Okay, but what expert consultations say is that you have to be very careful when you offer aggressive management. Okay. So the first documented survivors of rabies were reported in 1969. They only received intensive care without intubation. Okay, so they received intensive care. The first survivor received, there was no intubation. The Milwaukee Protocol was used in 2004. In India, we've had at least 6 well-documented cases of survival, but these have people, the survivors have severe neurological deficit. Now we've had also, it's probably also because there's a greater awareness of rabies and there's better critical care access, and so we are having a little more increase. When I talk about increase, it's a relative increase, very small amount. Okay, so now let's see, this is Gianna Geese, and she was the adolescent who survived bat rabies. Okay, and that's why you can see Gianna 1 and bat 0. Okay, so she removed a small bat from a church in September 2004. And when she told her parents that she'd got a small bite, they didn't think it was very serious. Okay, but within 6 weeks, she could hardly move. And within a week, after a week, she came out, okay, she was put in a medically induced coma so that her brain could heal. When she came, she could no longer speak, drink, or walk. And she had to relearn all of these, okay. And Gianna Geese, if you look her up now, she has even got married and she's become a mother. So that is something that we can celebrate, okay. It's a disease which is as deadly as rabies, and you have someone who beat it. Okay, so this is only a small majority of people who survive and who can beat it. So rabies-specific treatment, there has been an antiviral agent which has been developed, but it is not available with us here. There is research on antiviral agents, and there has been one which has been approved, okay, but we do not know about its benefit. I do not know about it as yet, but all I know is from the latest report is that there has been an agent which has been developed, okay. Now, how do we take care? Now, I'm focusing on this now because we have COVID-19 now, and you know that the bodies have to be disposed with great care, and we are especially more careful with COVID-19 patients because of the possible spread to air, blood fluids, body fluids. Okay, so we have to be much more careful. So in comparison, when you see those who have died of rabies, so they have to be labeled as infectious, but they are not contagious because there is no airborne or droplet transmission. So the risk of transmission to others is low if standard precautions are observed. The blood does not contain rabies virus, but the virus is present in other body tissues and fluids like your central nervous system as well as the salivary glands. If autopsy has to be done or embalming has to be done, it has to be taken with great care. And the body of the deceased should be allowed to be buried or cremated, okay, depending on the religious practices. With COVID-19, they are just doing mass burials. And relatives are not allowed to carry out the cremation. So while we know that person-to-person transmission is rare and practically not much of a risk, what is known with rabies is that transmission can occur via organ transplantation. So we have to be very careful when we want organ transplantation is important, very needed, especially cornea. And so we may be in a hurry because depending on the viability of the tissue. But if there is any evidence or if there is a suspicion that the person may have died from rabies, especially if they are having neurological symptoms or they have had neurological symptoms, then you have to see that, make sure that it is tested. Okay, so testing for common or highly fatal infection should be balanced against the urgency of transplanting a viable organ, because rabies has been documented to be transmitted via corneal transplants, And so we have to be careful. So after having seen a very fatal disease and not pleasant outcomes, it is good to know that we have human rabies vaccines, and our mainstay for vaccines are the cell culture vaccines. So we have 4 different types. You have a purified chick embryo vaccine, you have a purified virocell rabies vaccine, a human diploid cell vaccine, and you have a duck embryo vaccine. Now, the WHO pre-qualified vaccines are the Rabavert and Rabipur, which are produced by the same company, and you have ViroRab. Nerve tissue vaccines. Nerve tissue vaccines have been discontinued because they are associated with more severe adverse reactions, and they are much lesser immunogenic. And now that we have modern vaccines, it is better recommended that we switch to modern vaccines. So in Asia, in India, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, they have all been discontinued, even Pakistan. I think by 2015, most of these areas had all discontinued with nerve tissue vaccines. And you have nerve tissue vaccines are produced only in Algeria, Argentina, Bolivia, and Ethiopia. So these countries still are depending because their numbers are large and their cost and affordability, and so they have to. This is a decision that they've made between cost and efficacy. Okay. So current rabies vaccines, individual doses you get for intramuscular injection, 0.5 and 1, and which have been, so you get Rabipur comes as 1 ml and the others come, ViroRab comes as 0.5. And so we were very happy when we were starting the intradermal, because when you get 1 ml, then you can give more, okay, of the thing, because you just need 0.2 ml for the intradermal immunization. So the cost of the vaccine is what is really impeding the coverage. Okay, it is very expensive. And intradermal vaccination was for rabies was introduced only to reduce the cost. And what we found with the introduction of intradermal was that it was as if immunogenic, if not more, than the intramuscular. So that was good. Another interesting thing that we found was when we gave the intradermal, when we started the intradermal in place of intramuscular, was because we were giving 2 injections on the 2 deltoids. We thought that the patients would actually not be happy. You know, we were wondering, we were apprehensive when we started the intradermal, because 2 injections at the same time, you know, on the same day at 2 different sites. But we found, to our surprise, but the patients were very happy. You know, two, you're giving me 2 double, so they felt double protected, and that was a very good thing. You know, with the patients feeling much better. So intradermal administration of these vaccines is safe, it is immunogenic, cost saving very much, and dose sparing. So it is a good alternative to intramuscular administration. And because what we would tell is, even when we did not have vaccine in our center because of shortage was common, we would ask the patients, if we had 5 patients, we would ask each of them to buy 1 vial of vaccine. And we told them that we would give them the other vaccine whenever they would come. Okay. So all they had to do was buy 1 vaccine, which would cover 5 of them on one day, and we would reserve. So we would open 1 vial, give it to the 5 patients, and then reserve the 4 vials to be given to them over the next visit. Okay. So it works very well, giving an intradermal administration. Only 1 or 2 vials are required to complete a full course, and it replaces your load. Okay. The equivalent immune response at a lower dose, and so you save a lot of vaccine, you save a lot of money. Okay. So we have good vaccines, but like with every other vaccine, efficacy is not 100%, and we can get adverse events. So by and large, they are safe and well tolerated, but in around 35 to 45% of you can get minor. You can get redness, pain, you can get swelling at the site of injection. Especially when we give the intradermal, then they have a little more pain. You can get in 5 to 15%, you can get, patients can complain of fever, headache, dizziness, gastrointestinal symptoms. The serious adverse events like Guillain-Barré syndrome and allergic reactions are far more rare. So generally, cell culture vaccines are safe and well tolerated. Let me answer. Okay, let me ask at this time. Anybody's received? Anybody, has anyone taken, had to take any time rabies vaccine? Rabies vaccine? Anybody had to take? No? Very good.
One.
So now we look at the rabies immunoglobulins. So people who have had category 3 exposure and who have not received at least 2 doses either of pre-exposure or post-exposure, they need to be given the rabies immunoglobulin. Also severely immunocompromised persons, even if they are with category 2 exposure, then they need to be given the RIG. Okay, you should give them both vaccine as well as RIG. Okay, and it should be the best way to do what we would do if it was a large amount that we need to give, because it depends on the number of wounds and the bite, if it and the body weight. So you calculate 20 for human and for horse it's 40. So when you calculate and you see how much you have to give the dose, maximum amount should be infiltrated around the wound. The only difficulty that you would experience is when you're giving it around the hand areas, okay? Because when you want to infiltrate a large amount, it can cause a lot of swelling, okay? So it should be preferably be administered into the wound site to neutralize, and you can get human rabies, you get equine rabies, and you also get purified fragments. Today, they're also looking at making monoclonal antibodies. Once we have that, then the shortage of the serum should be overcome, okay? Because then we will be able to mass produce the monoclonal antibodies. So that is a breakthrough that is being awaited, okay? So rabies immunoglobulin should be given with the first dose of vaccine into and around the wound site. You have to clean the wound very scrupulously. You have to do deep irrigation. You have to apply a potent antiseptic, okay? And you have to give your dose as soon as possible. So human 20 international units per kg and equine at 40 international units per kg body weight. So if you have big persons, you can get quite a lot of dose that you have to give. So we would divide it and then give it. Some people, what they do is divide half, give half into the wound and give half into intramuscularly, as far as away from another site, not where you're giving the vaccine, they would give it away. But that evidence has been found that that's not as effective. When you give immunoglobulin, it can also cause serum sickness. Another thing is when you use chick embryo vaccines like Rabipur, you have to ask about egg allergy. Okay, because people who are allergic to eggs, then they are not suitable for Rabipur. Then you rather give them a Virorab. So how do we categorize the exposure? Category 1 is touching, feeding an animal, licks on intact skin. So you would say that there is no exposure and therefore PEP is not indicated. In category 2, there is nibbling of uncovered skin, minor scratches or abrasions, but there is no bleeding. Okay, so there is some exposure. So you need to give PEP. But if this is a bat to which you have been exposed, then you would treat this as a category 3. And category 3 is single, multiple transdermal bites, scratches, contamination of mucous membrane, saliva, licks, or licks on broken skin, exposure due to direct contact with bat,